The air in our kitchen usually smelled like vanilla candles and Sunday roast, but that evening it smelled like ozone and betrayal. I was standing by the sink, a dish towel forgotten in my hand, watching Sarah, my wife of 12 years, apply a shade of crimson lipstick that she usually reserved for our anniversaries. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her reflection in the hallway mirror, tilting her head with a practiced, predatory grace. The silence between us was heavy, the kind of silence that precedes a structural collapse. I watched her hand, steady, precise, as she traced the outline of her lips. This was a woman who knew exactly how much power she held in a single look. "You look nice," I said, the words feeling like dry sand in my throat. I was hoping for a lie. Yet I was begging for her to say she was meeting a client or going to a gallery opening. She didn't skip a beat. She popped the cap back on the lipstick with a definitive click and grabbed her designer clutch from the marble countertop. "I should. I'm going on a date, David." She turned then, her eyes sparkling with a cold, terrifying amusement. She walked over, her silk dress rustling like a warning, and patted my cheek with a hand that felt like ice. She leaned in close, her perfume, something expensive and floral, choking the air out of my lungs. "Don't be jealous. It's unbecoming." She laughed, a light melodic sound that used to be my favorite thing in the world, and walked out the door. The sound of her heels on the hardwood sounded like a countdown. I stood there paralyzed. As the engine of her SUV roared to life and faded into the distance. 12 years. 12 years of building a life, a home, and a future, and she had just walked out to meet another man as if she were going to the grocery store. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. I'm David Miller, and until 48 hours ago, I thought I was the luckiest man in Oak Ridge, Ohio. I thought I knew my wife, but as I sat there in the silence of our empty house, I realized I was living with a stranger, and that stranger was about to tear my world apart. To understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to understand the house. An architect doesn't just see walls, he sees the soul of a structure. When we moved to Oak Ridge 5 years ago, I bought the Victorian on Willow Lane as a shell. It was a ruin of rotting timber and peeling lead paint. I told Sarah it was a metaphor for us. We would take something broken and make it beautiful. I spent 18 months on my hands and knees, sanding floorboards until my fingers bled. I rewired the entire house, installed the crown molding by hand, and designed a custom kitchen that belonged in a magazine. Sarah was my muse. She'd bring me lemonade in the summer and hot cider in the winter. We sat on the porch and talked about the children we'd have, the legacy we'd leave. But looking back now, through the lens of that crimson lipstick, the cracks were always there. I just chose to call them character. Sarah started staying late at the gallery. She started changing her passwords on her laptop, claiming work confidentiality. She started looking at her phone in the middle of the night, the blue light reflecting in her eyes as she smiled at messages she wouldn't share. "Hey, Dave," my best friend and lead contractor Marcus had said to me over a beer a month ago. We were standing in the skeleton of a new build downtown. "You seen Sarah lately? She seems different." "I saw her at the bistro last week with Julian Thorne. They looked pretty cozy for a business meeting." I had laughed it off. I was so arrogant. "Julian's a developer, Mark. They're probably discussing gallery sponsorship. Don't be a conspiracy theorist." I wish I had listened. I wish I had looked closer at the dry cleaning receipts for dresses I'd never seen her wear. Instead, I stayed in my bubble of domestic bliss, nourished while the needle was being positioned to pop it. The night she left for her date, I didn't go to bed. I couldn't. I sat in my home office, surrounded by blueprints and models of buildings that would likely outlast my marriage. The only light came from the street lamp outside, filtering through the slats of the blinds, casting long, cage-like shadows across the floor. I felt like a ghost in my own home. I wandered through the rooms I had built for her, the master bedroom where we'd whispered our dreams, the dining room where we'd hosted 100 dinner parties. It all felt like a stage set now, fake, hollow. Around 2:15 a.m., the front door opened. I heard her hum a tune, a jazz standard we'd danced to at our wedding. She walked upstairs, her footsteps light and carefree. She didn't even check the office to see if I was awake. She didn't care. The next morning, she was gone before the sun hit the eaves. But in her haste, she had left her tablet on the nightstand. It was an old model, one we used for recipes or watching movies in bed. She'd forgotten to log out of her messaging app. I picked up the device, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I knew what I was about to find, but nothing could have prepared me for the casual cruelty of the words on that screen. The messages weren't from a stranger. They were from Julian Thorne. Julian was a high-profile developer, a man who built glass towers that looked impressive, but had no soul. He was wealthy, arrogant, and had a reputation for hostile takeovers, both in business and in life. He has no idea, one message from Sarah read, dated 3 days ago. Why he's so busy drawing blueprints for a life that doesn't exist that he can't see what's right in front of him. Soon, Julian. Just a few more weeks until the final signature. Julian's reply sent a chill through my soul. The house is the key, Sarah. Once the deed is transferred to the Thorne Trust as part of the gallery expansion deal, David is out, and we are in. Tell him whatever you need to. Keep him distracted with that fixer-upper nonsense. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. If you found out your partner was using your own hard work to build a life with someone else, how would you react? I didn't scream. I didn't smash the tablet against the wall, though every nerve in my body screamed for violence. When I sat on the edge of the bed I had hand-carved from cherry wood, and felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. In architecture, there is a concept called structural redundancy. You build in extra support so that if one part fails, the whole building doesn't come down. But Sarah and Julian were trying to remove the load-bearing wall of my entire life. They weren't just having an affair, they were orchestrating a financial execution. They wanted the Willow Lane house because its value had tripled since I renovated it. Julian needed the land for his Riverside Heights project, and Sarah wanted the payout to start over with him in Chicago. They were going to leave me with nothing but the dust of my own blueprints. But they forgot one thing. I designed the Riverside project as a consultant 3 years ago. I knew Julian Thorne's business inside and out. I knew his corners were cut, his permits were questionable, and his ego was his greatest weakness. I went to my office and pulled out a hidden floor tile under my desk. Inside was a black folder. It contained the original site surveys for Emerald Heights, Julian's crown jewel. I had flagged a massive discrepancy in the soil samples, trace amounts of toxic runoff from an old industrial site nearby. Julian had handled the report back then, and I, trusting the system, had let it go. Now I realized it was a weapon. I didn't go to the office that morning. Instead, I drove to a small, nondescript coffee shop on the edge of town, far from the eyes of anyone Sarah or Julian might know. I opened my laptop and began a deep dive into our joint accounts. Sarah was clever, but she was arrogant, and she assumed I was too pure for the world of finance. Hidden behind 3 layers of folders on our shared cloud drive, disguised as old tax receipts, was a spreadsheet. It was a roadmap of her betrayal. She had been slowly siphoning funds from our savings, money intended for our retirement, for the kids we never had, into an offshore account for 18 months. Every dinner, every girls' weekend, every luxury gift she claimed was a bonus from the Sterling Gallery. It was all documented. But then I found the consultation fees. Julian Thorne's shell company, Thorne Horizons, had been paying Sarah monthly. In exchange, she was giving him my proprietary designs for the upcoming City Civic Center project. My wife was selling my soul to my biggest competitor for 50 cents on the dollar. Before we go deeper, and I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story and share your thoughts in the comments. Is it the emotional betrayal of the affair or the cold-blooded financial theft? I decided to pay Sarah a surprise visit at the Sterling Gallery. I wanted to see the mass slip in person. The gallery was a cold, white space filled with abstract art that looked like shattered glass. Sarah was standing by a large canvas, talking intensely to Julian. He was leaning in, his hand dangerously close to the small of her back. "Sarah," I said, my voice echoing in the minimalist room. She jumped, her hand flying to her throat, a classic sign of guilt. Julian turned slowly, a smug, practiced smile spreading across his face. He adjusted his silk tie, looking at me like I was a fly he'd forgotten to swat. David, so what a surprise. I was just telling your wife what a marvelous job she's done with the lighting, Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. I'm sure the lighting is perfect, Julian, I replied, stepping into his personal space. I looked Sarah dead in the eye. I forgot to tell you this morning, honey. The city auditors called. There's a red flag on the Willow Lane deed. Something about the Thorne Trust signature being invalid. It seems the whole project is on hold. The color drained from her face. Julian's smile didn't falter, but I saw the vein in his temple throb. I had just told him I knew everything without saying a single word about the affair. I was speaking their language now, the language of assets and liabilities. That afternoon, I met with an old contact from the City Planning Commission, a man named Henderson who owed me a favor from a project a decade ago. We sat on a park bench, the autumn leaves swirling around us like tiny dying fires. I handed him a flash drive. What's this, David? You look like you haven't slept in a week, Henderson said. It's the truth about Emerald Heights, Henderson. Falsified soil reports, illegal waste dumping, and evidence of a bribery scheme involving Julian Thorne and the former lead inspector. Henderson looked at the drive like it was a live grenade. You realize this will pull the rug out from under his entire portfolio? The lawsuits alone will be a bloodbath. I'm an architect, Henderson, I said, standing up. I'm just pointing out the structural flaws. What happens when the building falls? Well, that's just gravity. If you were in my shoes, facing a situation like this, yeah, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. When I got home that evening, the house felt like a pressure cooker. Sarah was waiting in the living room, the lights dimmed. She had a glass of wine in her hand, but her fingers were trembling. What did you do today, David? She hissed. Julian is frantic. He says his investors are calling, asking about soil samples. What does that have to do with us? I sat down in the armchair and took a slow, deliberate sip of water. It has everything to do with us, Sarah. Or rather, the us you and Julian were building on the ruins of my life. You went through my things, she screamed, throwing her wine glass. It shattered against the fireplace I had built stone by stone. You had no right! I had no right? I stood up, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. You were selling my designs. You were stealing our savings. You were planning to put me on the street so you could move Julian into the house I built for you. You don't get to talk about rights, Sarah. I was bored, she yelled, her face contorting. You and your blueprints and your integrity. Julian is a winner. He takes things. You just build them. Well, I said, walking toward the door. He's about to lose everything, and so are you. I've filed for an emergency freeze on all joint assets. The house is going on the market tomorrow. You have until morning to pack your bags. The next week was a masterclass in controlled demolition. Julian Thorne's empire didn't just crumble, it vanished. The news was filled with stories of the Emerald Heights scandal. Environmental regulators descended on his sites, and his bank accounts were frozen by the SEC. Sarah was staying at a budget motel, her designer clothes looking increasingly out of place in the dingy room. She tried to call me a dozen times, shifting from rage to begging. She claimed she was under Julian's spell, that he had forced her to steal the designs. I didn't answer. I spent my nights in the empty house on Willow Lane, watching the boxes pile up. The house didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a crime scene. While I was clearing out the crawl space in the attic, I found something Sarah had forgotten in her rush to leave. It was a heavy, dark oak trunk tucked behind a false wall I'd built for storage. I'd never seen it before. I forced the lock. Inside wasn't jewelry or love letters. It was a collection of legal documents from New York State, dated 10 years ago. I started reading, and the world shifted beneath my feet yet again. Sarah Miller didn't exist before 2016. Her name was Sarah Vance. In Manhattan, she had been the primary suspect in a multi-million-dollar art fraud case. She had married a wealthy gallery owner, drained his accounts, and then disappeared when the FBI started asking questions. The gallery owner had been found dead in an apparent accident shortly after. I wasn't just a husband who'd been cheated on. I was a target. I was the next accident waiting to happen. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Finding out your entire marriage was a project for a professional con artist. How do you even begin to process that? I called Marcus that night. I need that PI you mentioned, the one who worked the union fraud case. 2 days later, I was sitting in a dim office with a man named Russo. He laid out the files. Sarah Vance is a pro, David. She changes her identity every 5 to 7 years. She targets mid-level professionals with high growth potential, architects, engineers, doctors. She builds a life, steals the intellectual property or the assets, and then moves on. What about the husband in New York? I asked. He didn't die, Russo said, sliding a photo across the desk. She framed him for the embezzlement. He spent 5 years in Sing Sing. He's out now, but he's a broken man. I want to meet him, I said. I drove 6 hours to a small town in upstate New York. I found the man Thomas living in a trailer. When I showed him the photo of Sarah Miller, he dropped his coffee cup. "Hey, she's still using that smile," he whispered, his eyes filled with a decade of pain. "She told me I was the love of her life while she was forging my signature on the wire transfers." "I'm going to put her away, Thomas," I said, "but I need your testimony. I need the trail she left in New York to connect to what she did to me in Ohio." "She'll kill you first," Thomas warned. "She doesn't lose, David." "She's never crossed an architect before," I replied. "We know how to find the weak spots." I knew Sarah was desperate. She was meeting Julian in a hotel downtown, likely planning to use the last of the consultation fees to flee the country. Julian was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are predictable. I sent Julian an anonymous email from an encrypted account. I attached the documents from the New York case. I told him that Sarah hadn't just been his partner. She had been setting him up to take the fall for the Emerald Heights scandal from day one. I told him she had a secret account with $5 million of his money. It was a lie. The account only had what she'd stolen from me, but it was the perfect spark. I sat in my car across from the hotel watching the police scanners. Around 11 p.m., the calls started coming in. A domestic disturbance in the penthouse suite. Julian had snapped. He had confronted Sarah about the New York documents. By the time the police arrived, they found Julian trying to throw Sarah's laptop off the balcony and Sarah screaming that Julian had murdered his previous business rivals. In the chaos, the police found the bag of stolen corporate blueprints I had anonymously tipped them off about. They also found the New York fraud files I'd conveniently left for the housekeeper to find. I stood in the back of the courtroom 6 months later. Sarah Vance, looking older and stripped of her glamour, was sentenced to 15 years for a litany of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy charges. Julian Thorne received 20. As Sarah was being led away in handcuffs, she caught my eye. There was no laughter left, only a cold, hollow vacuum where her soul should have been. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt finished. Tell me, after seeing the fall of Sarah and Julian, do you think David went too far, or was this the only way to truly stop a predator? Share your thoughts in the comments. I couldn't stay in Oak Ridge. Every street corner, every building I designed felt tainted by the memory of her. I moved back to Chicago and took a job at a large anonymous firm. I didn't want my name on the door anymore. I just wanted to draw. I became the man who checked every line twice. I became the man who didn't trust a handshake. I was a better architect, but a colder human being. A year to the day after the sentencing, I was sitting in Millennium Park. A woman sat on the bench next to me. She was beautiful, with a kind smile and eyes that seemed to hold a world of stories. We talked about the weather, the lake, the way the light hit the bean. "I'm Claire," she said. "David," I replied. We talked for an hour. She was a teacher. She felt real. But as we stood up to leave, she reached into her bag and pulled out a shade of lipstick. It was crimson. My heart hammered. My fight or flight response kicked in with the force of a freight train. Do you like this color?" she asked, noticing my stare. "I usually only wear it for special occasions." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw a woman who just liked the color. But I also saw the ghost of Sarah Miller. I realized then that Sarah hadn't just stolen my money. She had stolen my ability to believe in the beautiful things. "It's a striking color, Claire," I said, backing away. But I think I've had enough of that particular shade to last a lifetime. I walked away without looking back. Thank you so much for joining us for this intense journey. This story is a reminder that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we know the least. If you enjoyed this cinematic exploration of betrayal and justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to Family Secrets and Revenge for more immersive stories like this one. Anin, what did you think of David's final choice? Was he right to walk away from Claire? Or has his past made him too cynical? Let us know your overall thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one and love hearing your perspective. Until next time, stay vigilant.